was a fraternity prank. Also, the Pope decided today to release Vatican-related bath products. An incredible thing. Yes, it's the new Pope on a rope. That's right, Pope on a rope. Wash with it, go straight to heaven.
Hello,
Thank
everyone.
you.
My name is Dr. Bill Roach, and this is another episode of Timeless Dialogues. And today, we're going to deal with probably one of the most important topics for our age. Namely, we're going to look at this whole topic of tactical manipulations, because one of the things that we find is that so many people are either reacting to what's going on, falling into situations of which they have no control over, or they just get caught up in the buzz of whatever's the latest topic. And what I want to do is I want to equip you to engage these different issues and to not fall prey to various tactical manipulations. And how we're going to do this is we're going to go through and we're going to look at probably the top primer on these types of manipulations, namely Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals. And we're going to go through and look at a few key quotes here in order for you to see the playbook. In many respects, think of this as understanding the enemy's battle plan. Because here's one thing that I want you to see. Nothing's really changed. Whenever you start to see different sort of community organizers and figures who are trying to work on usually the left, but ironically, even the right is using this now, they tend to use these various different tactics for their objectives and to achieve their different ends. However, before we do that, please stick with me real quick. I just want to ask you to please do one thing for me. You know, we try to make a variety of different videos here because my goal is to equip you to think for yourself. In fact, that's kind of the motto of this podcast. But in order to do so, I need you to please do me one favor. Please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And part of the reason for that is that it helps me know, one, what you're looking at and what you are trying to come to this channel for so that I can make videos that equip you. If not, you're just going to get my random thoughts on different things that come about. But two, it helps to extend the reach of this channel. You know, we put a lot of effort into editing video and creating video for this, and I want to get these out to as many people as possible. So I know it may seem like a very simple little thing, but if you're watching this, please take the time, like and subscribe. Subscription is probably the most important. Third thing, please try to watch the videos, help to grow the different watch time on this. And, you know, I usually don't talk about this a lot. I feel like I need to every now and then because it's the best way for you to just continue to help this channel grow. And, you know, for whatever it's worth, we've grown pretty seismically over the last year or so. You know, some channels just explode and, you know, we don't have all the bells and whistles like the professional ones, but we've grown probably tenfold in the last year. So I just really, in many respects, give glory to God with that. But also, I want to thank you. And again, please like and subscribe. Now, jumping right into this. Rules for Radicals. Saul Alinsky's book in which he's teaching community organizers how to actually engage in these different tactics. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to listen to this one little quote, and I'm not just going to read, I'm going to pull up some of these, but I want to pull up one little section here. Bear with me as we flip to this page where he is talking about how this works. How do the manipulations actually occur? And he gives us these 3 points. In this edition of the book, it's page 136. Listen to me here. You get nothing more. Get this. The real action is in the enemy's reaction. Rule 2. The enemy, properly goaded and guided in his reaction, will be your major strength. And 3, tactics like organization, like life, require that you move with the action. So think about what he's trying to get at here. The real action is in the enemy's reaction. So what's going on is you see all of these different manipulations that are taking place. And what they're doing is they're using a variety of different means to get you to react in a particular way. And, you know, I've given this analogy time and time again, and it probably just comes from my background. You know, one of the things that I do is I do different competitive striking martial arts and different competitive grappling martial arts. And I like to use the grappling manipulations, but we could use them in a variety of them. And what we do is that one of the goals of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is that you get the opponent to the ground, and then when you get them to the ground, you work to pass their guard or to seek an advantageous position on them. And that could be the mount, it could be side control, it could be back, whichever position it is. Let's just say, in this instance, we've taken the mount on the individual. So I'm on top of the person. And let's just say I'm going for a cross-collar choke. And when I'm laying that choke in on the individual, they start to push their arm forward. Now, what I want you to see is that I actually want them to push their arm forward. If they don't take the bait and they don't push their arm, I'll just choke them out. But if they are taking the bait and I'm choking and they start to extend their arm, I'm going to take that arm lock, because the real action that I'm looking for is their reaction to the submission that I'm giving them. And that's how these tactics work, is that Alinsky and all of these other figures, whether they're socialist, Marxist, or whichever, they realize that if they can provoke you in such a way to make you look like a fool or to give them what they're wanting, they win. The other thing is he says this: the enemy properly goaded and guided, notice, goaded, provoking, but guided in his reaction will be your major strength. And I don't think people realize this, is that so much of what goes on with these different sort of tactics is that they're specifically guided in a way in order to get you to, in many respects, react the way that they want you to react. And I don't think this is what people realize, is that so many times on Twitter, people will say things in order to just get you to respond in the way that they want you to. And, you know, the analogy that we've been giving this is that you see these things called like narrative arcs. They're trying to get you from where you're at to the end goal, the end story, the end point, whatever it may be. And they use a variety of postmodern linguistic manipulations, political manipulations, all of these different manipulations and tactics in order to get you to respond in a particular way. Now, here's the one that we've been talking about is, you know, we've been saying this with Christian nationalism or with the woke movement. And just think about this, is that if they can provoke a situation in which you look like a racist, and every time you look like a racist, you go out and you do something to alleviate your racism, well, they're not only goading you, they're guiding you. And in many respects, this can work on both the left and the right. And on the right, we've been talking about this as it relates to Christian nationalism. And namely, there are some figures who see this as just nothing more than, you know, this is Christian morality in society. We see things happening out there. And I go, I see what you're saying, but that's not the whole story. You're not controlling the narrative arc. You know, the left is determining how the universities, how the media, how social media, and all these other ones understand the term Christian nationalism. So just because a few Christian nationalists are like, no, I am defining this term, and I go, you're more reacting to their goading than anything else. But notice this: tactics like life, or like organization, like life, require that you move with the action. So you need to be fluid. You need to understand the fluidity of what's going on with this. So what I want to do here is I want you to understand how this is working. And one of the things that I've seen is that this whole concept of the real action is your reaction, that really has become something very popular coming about from Dr. James Lindsay. And in fact, you know, he wasn't the first one to ever discuss this. This is like a well-known tactic of different sort of totalitarian groups. But I would really encourage you to go, and in fact, I'll post a link to this in the description of this video here, and listen to James Lindsay's whole lecture on the real action is your reaction, or in many respects, the real action is the enemy's reaction, or the enemy properly goaded and guided is his reaction that will be your major strength. Because what he's going to do is he's going to explain this in a variety of different ways as it relates to Christian nationalism and the woke movement. But I want to do something just a little different here. So what I want you to see is that we live in a society of intentional manipulations. And what I want to do here is I want to pull up this little thing here. And I put this tweet out about different things related to Christian nationalism and its conflict. Now, I'm not trying to just talk about this all the time. One of the reasons I'm talking about is because it is a big topic today. It is something that a lot of more conservatives that are on, you know, my side of things tend to be reacting and discussing. But one thing I want you to understand is like what's going on with some of these figures. Notice I have to say some of these figures, not necessarily all of these figures. And if I were to drop different names of like the Fed or the community organizer and these different figures that are out there, they would get all offended and call me an evil person, which is part of their manipulations. But I said this, do you sometimes wonder why there's so much conflict over Christian nationalism? And then I give 3 quotes by Saul Alinsky of which he talks about just conflict and how conflict moves dialogue forward. And here's the first one. It says, the first step in community organization is community disorganization. So whenever you start to see somebody going out there causing all of this ruckus, causing all of this conflict, you have to ask yourself this question. Is this person following Alinsky's first step? Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Some people are just, disruptive by nature, but some people are intentional by nature. And what they're doing is they're trying to cause this disorganization within an already organized community so that they can, in many respects, follow up with it, so that they can do something with it. Namely, they can enlist whatever their chief objective is. The second thing that I said is this: all organization, this is the quote, means disorganization of the old and organization of the new. So clearly it's an issue of disrupt, dismantle, and replace. Again, disrupt, dismantle, and replace. So as we look at some of these issues, when you have to get rid of the old order in order to have the new order, there has to be a particular way in which you do this. So, there's certain figures out there right now that want to do away with constitutional liberties or liberties and rights given to us within the Bill of Rights, such as constitutional free speech and issues of, religious freedom. Everybody's got, blasphemy laws, so we might as well just have our own, even to the point of, imprisonment, banishment, or death of people who would disagree with them. But what's going on here is a tactical regime change, a tactical way of taking this disorganization to bring about a new organization, a new founding of these ideas that they're giving. And then the third is this: when those prominent in the status quo turn and label you as an agitator, they are completely correct. For that is, in one word, your function: to agitate to the point of conflict. So in many respects, Alinsky would talk about when these things occur, they have given you your birth certificate. Once somebody finally labels you for what you are, you've reached this status quo. And I don't have any problem actually doing that because, I can see people being like, well, don't ever label them as the agitator. You're giving the enemy a status that he or she should never have. Well, the reality is you got to call out manipulations and you got to call out manipulators. So then I asked this question: who are the agitators? What communities are they trying to disorganize? And if you followed anything on here, you'll realize the Fed agitators that are out there, the community organizers that are out there that are working specifically and intentionally in so many areas to disrupt and dismantle conservative evangelicalism. We saw how this worked within the woke movement. We understand how this is working on the Christian nationalist issue. But what I want you to see is these are just two of a plethora of issues that we might face. And what I want you to see is that if they can keep the game going, it doesn't matter what the issue is. You're going to keep reacting and you're going to keep falling for it because the real action is your reaction. They're trying to tick you off. They're trying to get you to respond in a particular way so that they can control the particular narrative. Now, what I want to do here is that I want you to look at a couple of things here. And I want you to see that there can be these online sort of struggle sessions that we see take place here. We'll switch to a different view here real quick. And what you'll find is struggle sessions are things that totalitarians use to control and depict and guide these manipulations. And in years past, it could have been protesters at a business or something along those lines. Today, it could just be bombarding your Twitter channel with a variety of different ideas. And I actually want to pull up one of these that I discussed because I thought it was quite interesting. Give me 1 second here. All right, I'm going to pull this up here. Let me switch back to an evaluation. So one figure that I know always posts a little laughter here. So I made a post and I like this guy, AD. Not going to talk about him any other than that, but he always posts this laughing mark. And I got to always preface this: AD is not a Marxist. AD is not following just the tactical, book of Saul Alinsky or any of these kinds of things. I think what he's doing is he's just fallen into the mood of how these things can operate. So taking AD out of this, I want you to see how laughter works. So Alinsky discusses how to use these online sort of tactical manipulations like laughter to achieve them. And I said this: we know how these social tactics work? How do you respond to them? Call them for what they really are. Also, note they are just looking for your reaction. So then I give these two quotes. Quote, it should be remembered that you can threaten the enemy and get away with it. You can insult and annoy him, but one thing that is unforgivable and that is certain to get him to react is to laugh at him. This causes irrational anger. And we all know this. We've seen this in our own lives. If you have, a sibling who is annoying you and picking on you or beating you up, and then they start to laugh, that will tick somebody off more than anything else that you will ever see. But the point is they're actually trying to get you to react. They're trying to get you angry. Another one is that I look at these three things and I actually quote this section where Alinsky says the real action is the enemy's reaction, the enemy properly goaded and guided. Notice, guided, I say again, and his reaction will be your major strength. And 3, tactics like organization, like life, require that you move with the action. Saul Alinsky. So we see how these online struggle sessions can work. And it's funny because sometimes they'll label you with different terms. And it's funny because one of them that you'll hear in classic Marxist things is, oh, you're so bourgeoisie, you're so bourgeois, you're so middle class, you're so that. And what it is it's a labeling tactic that's been put on it. And it's funny because there's another one that's almost like bourgeois today. It's, you're a boomer con conservative or whatever phrase they're using. And all it is it's a label in order to disrupt, dismantle, divide, put you in a group, something and so forth. But it's not actually a dealing with it. It's an online struggle session. It's a Marxist tactic. It's an intentional manipulation. Don't fall for it. So I want to switch here and I want to look at Saul Alinsky's different rules. So as I pull this up here, I'll switch over and I want to look at a few of them. And we pull this up. This is actually the one that I want to look at here. So one thing that I got to do so that all of you can see this is I actually have to adjust this window because you would like to actually see each of the rules. Am I right? So bear with me. It takes me 1 second because we kind of film these somewhat live. And there we go. We can pull it up. We can discuss them. And here's what it is. He gives you in this book, Saul Alinsky's 12 Rules for Radicals. I'm just pulling this off the internet because you would like to see the rules. I could just read them, but you can actually go through it here. And he gives this whole chapter here when he's trying to give us the different tactics here. And he gives us in the beginning, but these are his rules. These are his tactics that he lays out. And here's one thing I want you to see. Tactics mean doing what you can with what you have. Tactics are those consciously deliberate acts by which human beings live with each other and deal with the world around them. And the world of give and take, tactics is the art of how to take and how to give. Here our concern is with the tactics of taking, how the have-nots can take power from the have. So here are the rules. Here's the playbook for society today. In fact, I've been told that one of the things that people will do within different societies, in particular, like Charlie Kirk's organization, is he has everybody that works for him read this book. And one of the reasons that he does is because the playbook hasn't changed. And in so many respects, this is what is going on with the progressive left today. And I want you to see how it works so that you don't actually react to the reactions. I also want to say by way of reminder that I am from Iowa and I like corn. So if anybody out there with Turning Point USA wants to know this, I am from Iowa and I like corn. There's an inside joke there. So the first thing I want you to see here is his first rule that he gives. Quote, power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. Power is derived from two main sources, money and people. Have-nots must build power from flesh and blood. These are two things of which there's plentiful supply. Government and corporations always have a difficult time appealing to people and usually do so, excuse me, almost exclusively with economic arguments. But here's what I want you to see. They want you to either have power or to make people think that, in this sense, but what the enemy thinks you have. So power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks that you have. So when you look at the different debates that are going out there, people will give this projection as though they actually have power. And one of the things that Alinsky talks about is the necessity of power and why you must fight for power. But one thing you have to see here is it's not only just the actual having of power, it's the projection of power. So if somebody can project as though they are powerful, they are in many respects guiding you towards a reaction of, namely, I either don't want to mess with this guy or I need to align with this guy because they're going to take me somewhere with what I'm going to do. They have the resources, they have the means, whatever it may be along those lines. Namely, if you don't have power, make your enemy think that you do have power. So what do we have to do here? Sometimes, backing up on this, you have to call the person's bluff. Sometimes people don't actually have power, but they're just projecting it. And I use this as a fighting analogy. You know, some people will huff and puff and flex their muscles. When it's funny, usually the biggest, strongest weightlifters are like the worst fighters that are out there. I've seen it time and time again. Like they can't grapple, they can't move, but they do have power, but sometimes they're just giving you the projection of power. So rule number 2, we're going to fly through these. I want you to just be exposed to them. Rule number 2, never go outside the expertise of your people. So one of the things that he's trying to get at here is it results in confusion, fear, and retreat. Feeling secure adds to the backbone of anyone. So organizations under attack wonder why radicals don't address the real issues. This is why. They avoid things with which they have no knowledge. So you always want to stay within the experience of your people. You want people to understand that there's 2 things here. You have to deal with the people of your particular community. So for him, it would be the middle class or the social organizing group that you're trying to interact with. And you want to use what they know best to achieve your ends. And I'm going to actually tell you a really funny story with this here in just a minute, like literally the funniest story in this entire book. But another thing is that if you don't want to go outside of the expertise or the knowledge base of the individuals that you're dealing with, you also don't want to, in many respects, keep your enemy within their area of knowledge. You want to get them outside of their knowledge every single time. So, for example, if you have a person who's, say, an expert in legal theory, well, you want to get them to debate Hebrew. Or if somebody's a theologian, you want to get them to debate some abstract, weird historical data from some country that they know nothing about, and you know that they know nothing about. That's why he's really talking about when an action or tactic is outside of the experience of the people, the result is confusion, fear, and retreat. It also means a collapse of communication, as we have noted. So they're not going to be able to dialogue, but they're going to be confused, fearful. They're not going to want to engage. Seems like they're trying to guide you and goad you in a particular way. The next one, rule number 3. Whenever possible, go outside the expertise of the enemy. Look for ways to increase insecurity, anxiety, and uncertainty. This happens all the time. Watch how many organizations under attack are blindsided by seemingly irrelevant arguments that they are then forced to address. So one of the things that he talks about here is he talks about with General W.T. Sherman, whose name still causes a frenzied reaction throughout the South, provided a classic example of going outside of the enemy's experience. He talks about, until Sherman, military tactics and strategies were based on standard patterns. All armies had fronts, rears, flanks, lines of communication, and lines of supply. Military campaigns were aimed at such standard objectives as rolling up the flanks of the enemy army, or cutting the lines of supply or lines of communication, or moving around to attack from the rear. Notice this. Alinsky says this: when Sherman cut loose on his famous march to the sea, he had no front or rear lines of supplies or any other lines. He was on the loose and living on the land. The South, confronted with this new form of military invasion, reacted with confusion, panic, terror, and collapse. Sherman swept on to inevitable victory. And it was the same tactic that years later, in the early days of World War II, the Nazi Panzer tank divisions emulated in their far-flung sweeps into enemy territory, as did our own General Patton and the American 3rd Armored Division. So the point that he's trying to get at here, let's restate this. Whenever possible, go outside of the experience of your enemy. Let's go back to a fighting analogy. You know, one of the things that I loved about the early UFC is that if you were to watch like martial arts movies from the 60s, 70s, 80s, or whatever, there was this agreed upon way of here's how we fight. Okay, you're going to line up. You're going to get your hands up. You're going to have these kicks. You're going to have these reactions. But nobody really grappled. Like wrestling was always there. People recognized grappling was a reality, but it wasn't just sort of like this agreed upon way. Like if you wanted to learn how to fight, you had to fight like Bruce Lee. You had to learn karate. You had to learn taekwondo, whatever it was. And then UFC happened and the Gracies happened and jiu-jitsu came on the scene. And what do? Close the distance, take them to the ground and put the enemy in his uncomfortable place. And they just literally just mop the floor with them. This is exactly what's going on here, is that if your enemy likes to stand, take them to the ground. If your enemy likes to go to the ground, maybe get them to stand. Or let's use a totally other analogy to prove the same point. In the book of 5 Rings, Miyoto Musashi gives this whole analogy where he's talking about different tactics. And it's his whole mountain sea tactic that he gives. And if your enemy thinks that you're going to attack at the mountain, attack at the sea. If he thinks that you're going to attack at the sea, attack at the mountain. The point is that make them fight in a place that's not advantageous to them. So notice when your enemy is trying to pull you into a place where you're not advantageous, where you are weak, where you are not strong, where you can be easily manipulated, and don't fall for it. Rule number 4, make the enemy live up to his own rule or book of rules. If the rule is that every letter gets a reply, send 30,000 letters. You can kill them with this because no one can possibly obey all of their rules. This is a serious rule. They besiege entities' very credibility and reputation is at stake because if activists catch it lying or not living up to its commitments, they can continue to chip away at the damage. So one of the things that Alinsky talks about here is in this 4th rule, he says you can kill them with this, for they can no more obey their own rules than the Christian church can live up to their Christianity. So think about how this can work, is that a person can realize is that if you have certain expectations, they're going to hold you to those expectations. For there's an underlying given premise that nobody's perfectly consistent. Nobody's perfectly consistent. We all have our blind spots. We all have areas where we're going to fall short. And when you do fall short, your enemy will capitalize upon those manipulations. So be aware of it. Know how they can do it. If you make rules you can actually live up to because they're going to make you live up to them. Another one is this. Ridicule is man's most potent weapon, he says here. It is almost impossible to counterattack ridicule. Also, it infuriates the opposition who then react to your advantage. So as we talk about this, we give this analogy, you can poke a dog and poke a dog and poke a dog. And then when he bites you, oh, look, the dog bit me. We got to get rid of this dog. Or you have an employee that they want to get rid of and they do everything under their sun to get the employee to react. What is that? That's what they're using for their advantage. Well, Marxists and Alinsky-likes and totalitarians, they do the exact same thing. They try to ridicule you because there's no defense. It's irrational. It's infuriating. It also works as a key pressure point to force the enemy into concessions. Pretty crude, rude, and mean, huh? They want to create anger and fear, so don't fall for it. If they're trying to tick you off, stay cool, stay calm. Don't fall for it. Realize it's a goaded and guided way to get your reaction to be the action that they're actually looking for. Another one is this. A good tactic is one your people enjoy. Notice what this commentator says. They'll keep doing it without urging and coming back to do more. They're doing their thing and will even suggest better ones. Radical activists in this sense are no different than any other human being. We all avoid unfun activities, but we revel at and enjoy the ones that work and bring the results. So one of the things that he's getting at here, just to talk about this, it says if your people are not having a ball doing it, there's something very wrong with the tactic. So I actually think, and I bring this up, one of the reasons that you see all of these different memes and videos that people are using and different pictures that they're trying to post to people is that they're trying to use rule 5 of ridicule, mock, make fun of to get you to react in a way that's irrational. Because we all recognize that when we're irrational and we're ticked off, we do stupid stuff. But also, people enjoy this stuff. People laugh. And laughter, like I've already said, it is a tactic that's used, but it's a great tactic that can sometimes be used. It's a tactic sometimes that we need to call out when people are doing it as a way of not properly engaging, but also laughter sometimes is a way to keep your audience involved. So if you're a community organizer, you want to keep people looking at your Twitter feed and looking at your YouTube and looking at whatever you're doing. Why? Because it keeps the pressure on. It keeps the issues going. And that brings us to our next point. Rule 7, a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. Notice, don't become old news. Even radical activists get bored. So to keep them excited and involved, organizers are constantly coming up with new tactics. So he uses this analogy in the book. He says, man can sustain military interest in any issue only for a limited time, after which it becomes a ritualistic commitment, like going to church on Sunday mornings. New issues and crises are always developing, and one's reaction becomes, quote, well, my heart bleeds for those people, and I'm all for the boycott. But after there are other important things in life, and if there is, there it goes. So the point is that people will follow you for a short amount of time. Like we have short attention spans, they get tired of the boycotts, or the point that he's trying to get at here is don't let it become a drag. Move it around. So if you see them going in this direction, think about how this works. They're going in this direction and the manipulation is going this way. And then all of a sudden they switch and they go that way. That's a tactical move. If you see a group of people all doing one thing for one purpose, for one end, and then they all just switch like overnight. For example, have you noticed, and I use this with it, is that for the longest amount of time, all of these Christian nationalists were just constantly going out using mockery. And then they had this like holier than thou moment. We are not going to be doing mockery. We are above such things. They switched the tactic because it wasn't working. Plain and simple. Leftists do this all the time too. This is just a tactic of community organization that goes on. Rule 8, keep going here for the sake of time. Keep the pressure on. Never let up. So they keep moving. They keep doing this. The fight keeps going on. It says keep trying new things to keep the opposition off balance. As the opposition masters one approach, hit them from the flank with something new. Attack from all sides, never giving the reeling organization a chance to rest, regroup, recover, and re-strategize. The point that he's trying to get at here with Rule 8, notice this. He says, keep the pressure with different tactics and actions and utilize all events of the period for your purpose. Keep using them. Or when a different issue arises, how can you twist it for your end? How can you repurpose it for your end? Notice, let's just keep going here. Rule 9, the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. So as he explains here in the commentary, he says, imagination and ego can dream up many more consequences than the activists. Perception is reality. Large organizations always prepare worst case scenarios or a worst case scenario, something that may be the furthest from the activist's mind. The upshot is that the organization will expend enormous time and energy creating in its own collective mind the direst of conclusions. The possibilities can easily poison the mind and result in demoralization. Going back to a fighting analogy. Sometimes if you think that your enemy is way stronger than you, better than you, more tactical than you, that's actually more fearful than actually getting in there and fighting the guy. Seriously, I know more people who have lost the match the night before because they're worried about the person's record or they're worried about, look at what this guy has done. And I've fallen prey to that. Like I've had times where I'm like, oh my goodness, this guy's a world champ. This guy's going to be difficult. And then you go in and you're fine. The point is that the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. And so when people are using threats of they're going to do this and they're going to do that, most people actually don't follow through with them. And it's funny because usually there's two types of threats that I've seen. Usually the person that, one, doesn't know how to fight will threaten to fight the most, and they think the threat is going to empower them. And, we can give analogies of this, like little guy driving a big truck or little woman syndrome sometimes, where they create this whole, aura about themselves. You're like, whatever, man. Like, I don't have to deal with it. Your threats don't mean anything to me. But the second one usually comes from lawyers. Have you noticed this? Like, I remember this situation happened where this lawyer was like, oh my goodness, you're portraying me in such a bad light. And they sent a cease and desist letter to somebody. And I get it. There are times for proper cease and desist. And I'm not denying that rule of law that can be given within, our jurisprudence and legal world that we live in. But a lot of times, like, the threat usually can just get whatever you think is going to happen to stop, and they're going to react the way that you want them to. And it's funny because people use these kinds of tactics because they realize what they do is they create a mental battle that most people can't run away from. In fact, I think that's why we live in such a, litigious society, is because we realize that a letter from a lawyer just scares the ever living daylights out of people, but sometimes realize it for what it really is. Nothing more than that. It's an empty threat sometimes. It's a threat can sometimes accomplish more. Now, here's what I want you to see off of this whole thing that I'm showing you, is that this commentator actually gets the rules off. Rule 10 is, and let's see if I can switch this over and you can see. There you go. This is the actual rule 10. And I will not fix that because I'm going to go back to that one. Is the major premise for tactics is the development of operations that will maintain a constant pressure upon the opposition. Notice, it is this unceasing pressure that results in the reactions from the opposition that are essential for the success of the campaign. It should be remembered not only that the action is the reaction, but that the action is itself the consequence of reaction, and of reaction to the reaction ad infinitum. The pressure produces the reaction, and constant pressure sustains the action. The point that I'm trying to get you to see here is that as they're trying to give us this whole point that they're trying to move us towards is that the major premise for tactics is the development of operations that will maintain constant pressure. Again, I use a grappling analogy here. If you can put pressure on somebody, like on a person's chest, or affect their face and their breathing, they will utterly freak out and give you whatever reaction that you want. In fact, we have this move that we use within jiu-jitsu, is that there used to be two things, is that, within MMA, you can get on top of someone and you can drill down strikes. If you take this elbow and you just right down on somebody, you can give a lot of power on somebody or strike. But what it does is it causes them to move their arms. Well, within like classical grappling, like, you go to a jiu-jitsu match, you drop an elbow on somebody and you're disqualified. But if you can affect the guy's breathing and they start to move, and then an arm comes out, guess what you can do? Capitalize upon it. The point is constant pressure to get the reaction here. So as we keep going here, I want you to realize this. He is going to call rule 10, which is actually rule 11. So notice, rule 11, ding, 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 is that if you push a negative hard and deep enough, it will break through into its counter side. Notice this. Violence from the other side can win the public to your side because the public sympathizes with the underdog. Unions use this tactic. Peaceful, albeit loud demonstrations during the heyday of unions in the early to mid 20th century incurred management's wrath, often in the form of violence that eventually brought public sympathy to their side. I think this rule speaks for itself, is that if the enemy is, in this sense, as it says, this is based on the principle that every positive has its negatives. We've already seen the conversation of the negative, or the conversion of the negative into the positive, in Mahatma Gandhi's development of the tactic of passive resistance. Now, one thing that you find here is that in many respects, as he says here, in a fight, almost anything goes. It almost reaches the point where you stop to apologize if a chance blow lands above the belt. The point that we're trying to get at here, or that he's actually trying to get at here, is that you can use this negative to become your positive. Continuing on, Rule 11, which actually for him is Rule 12 because the guy got it off. He says the price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. Never let the enemy score points because you're caught without a solution to the problem. Old saw. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Activist organizations have an agenda, and their strategy is to hold a place at the table, to be given a forum to wield their power. So they have to have a compromise solution. And remember, please stick with me. We've got a very, very funny video that we're going to play here. So the next one. So Rule 12, which is here, Rule 11, but it's actually Rule 12, is the prize of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. The next one, he says, pick the target, freeze it, because Rule 12 will actually be 13, personalize it, and polarize it. So the point that he's getting at here is cut off the support network and isolate the target from sympathy. Go after people and not institutions. People hurt faster than institutions. This is cruel, but very effective. Direct, personalized criticism and ridicule works. Now, I want to share what I think is one of, if not the funniest thing I have ever seen in Alinsky's whole book. And it's his whole baked beans analogy. It is one of the funniest ones. So let's pull it up here. I think you can see it here. So he talks about this. He says, for example, I have emphasized and re-emphasized that tactics means you do what you can with what you've got, and that power in the main always remains gravitated towards those who have money and those whom it follows, the resources, the haves and the have-nots. And he talks about, I suggested that we might buy, and he's trying to talk about how we can use these, 100 seats for one of Rochester's symphony concerts. He's trying to get these people in there. And he says, we would select a concert in which the music was relatively quiet. And what they were wanting to do is they were trying to do a major protest, and they realized they were going to face a lot of opposition. So they're trying to personalize, and they're trying to use these different tactics that he's just laid out here. It says, we would select a concert in which the music was relatively quiet. Now listen here. This is so funny. This is so funny. It says, the 100 blacks who would be given the tickets would first be treated to a 3-hour pre-concert dinner in the community. Notice, staying within the experience, in which they would be fed nothing but baked beans and lots of them. Then the people would go to the symphony hall with obvious consequences. I wonder what those would be. Imagine the scene when the action began. The concert would be over before the first movement. This is a Freudian slip, so let it be. Let's examine this tactic in terms of the concepts mentioned above. First, the disturbance would be utterly outside of the experience of the establishment, which was expecting the usual stuff of mass meetings, street demonstrations, confrontations, and parades. Not in their wildest fears would they expect an attack on the prized cultural jewel, their famed symphony orchestra. Second, all of the action would ridicule and make a farce of the law, for there is no law, and there probably never will be, banning natural physical functions. Are you picking up what's going on here? He fed a bunch of these people a bunch of baked beans, and they got terrible gas. Not only were they letting it proverbially rip, and you would hear it throughout, people were laughing uncontrollably. In addition, he's going to talk about the smell was out of control. So he talks about, with this, he says, all of the action would ridicule and make fun of them. He says, you would hear a combination not only of noise, but also of odor. What you might call natural stink bombs. Regular stink bombs are illegal and cause for immediate arrest, but there would be absolutely nothing here that the police department or the ushers or any other servant of the establishment could do about it. The law would be completely paralyzed. People would recount what had happened in the symphony hall, and the reaction of the listener would be to crack up in laughter. It would make the Rochester Symphony and the establishment look utterly ridiculous. There would be no way for the authorities to cope with any future attacks of a similar character. What could they do? Demand the people not eat baked beans before coming to the concert? Ban anyone from succumbing to natural urges during the concert? Announce to the world that the concert must not be interrupted by farting? Such tactics would destroy the future of the symphony season. Imagine the tension at the opening of any concert. Imagine the feeling of the conductor as he raised his baton. With this would come certain fallouts. On the following morning, the matrons, to whom the symphony season is one of the major social functions, would confront their husband, both executives and junior executives, at the breakfast table and say, John, we are not going to have our symphony season ruined by those people. I don't know what they want, but whatever it is, something has got to be done. This kind of thing has to be stopped. And lastly, we have the universal rule that while one goes outside of the experience of the enemy in order to induce confusion and fear, one must not do the same with one's own people, because you do not want them to be confused and fearful. Now, let us examine this rule with reference to the symphony tactic. To start with, the tactic is within the experience of the local people. It also satisfies another rule, that the people must enjoy the tactic. Here we have an ambivalent situation. The reaction of the blacks in the ghetto, their laughter when the tactic was proposed, made it clear that the tactic, at least in fantasy, was within their experience. It connected with their hatred of Whitey, the one thing that all oppressed people want to do to their oppressors is to proverbially on them. Here was an approximate way to do this. However, we are also aware that when they found themselves actually in the symphony hall, probably for the first time in their lives, they would find themselves seated amid a mass of whites, many of them in formal dress. This situation would be so much out of their experience that they might congeal and revert back to their previous role. This, or the very idea of doing what they had come to do, would be so embarrassing, so mortifying, that they would do almost anything to avoid carrying out the plan. But we also knew that the baked beans would compel them physically to go through with the tactic, regardless of how they felt. I must emphasize that tactics like this are not just cute. Any organizer knows as a particular tactic grows out of the rules and the principles of revolution that he must always analyze the merit of the tactic and determine its strengths and weaknesses in terms of the same rules. So the point that I want you to see here is the key thing. You have to see how manipulations work. You have to see that there are tactical manipulations on the left, on the right. And this analogy is absolutely, utterly hilarious. The point is that the reaction is that they wanted these things to change, and they knew if they could pressure the wives and if they could break down the symphony, they could get their end goal objective. In fact, I'm not exactly sure what the end goal objective was for Alinsky in this situation. And one could, call into question whether he was dehumanizing the people by giving them beans and making them do this, whatever. In fact, I don't even think Alinsky would care. In fact, I don't think most leftists care. They're using these people as a means unto his ends, which is funny. We're not going to talk about it here today. He actually talks about means and ends in this book, significantly talking about means unto ends, and it's totally utilitarian. They don't really care what the means are as long as they achieve the ends. So here's what I want you to see in conclusion. Don't react in a goaded and guided way that they're trying to force your reaction. Realize that your reaction is the action they're looking for, that the narrative arc can be broken when you call out the manipulation. So think of these rules. Think of how they apply, understand how they apply, don't fall for them, because in the end, they're nothing more than tactical manipulations to get you to react in a way that's going to make you look foolish, irrational, and ultimately fall for their different ploys.
Good morning, Vietnam!
10,000 years will give you such a crick in the neck.